The Spin-Off Podcast Network. Skinny are helping you show how smart you are with the 1Q quiz, an all-new, super challenging and super quick daily quiz built by the Spin-Off. Every Monday, Skinny are giving you the chance to prove you're smart with the Skinny Extra Credit question. Get it right, and you'll get the chance to score yourself some Skinny Extra mobile credit, so you can text, call, or even video call your group chat and gloat about how big your brain is. T's and C's apply.
The Fold is brought to you by O-Media, making brands unmissable and public spaces better across Aotearoa. No mai, hoki mai, kia The Fold, e mihi nei, ko Duncan Greive tōku ingoa. My guest today is Chris Schulz, who was, the name might be familiar, he was a senior writer at the Spin-Off until quite recently, and just an incredible, you'd call it an entertainment journalist. He writes about pop culture he's got a real story sense. He's got a sort of encyclopedic knowledge of film, television, and music in particular. It's music that we're talking about today. He's since gone on to be investigations editor at Consumer, but still writes Boiler Room, a Substack, which, it's really like a product of whatever is buzzing around in Chris's brain in terms of the sort of music, pop culture kind of space. And he's been on a real tear with New Zealand music and New Zealand music journalism. He and I have very similar backgrounds in some respects. Both of us started out sort of desperate to claw our way into writing about music. He was writing for Rip It Up at the same time I was writing for Real Groove. He took a different path. He went into staff write about entertainment there, and ultimately worked in the Herald's entertainment section and on Time Out as a magazine. And he talks about, and this, even when he left the Herald in 2019, this is 4 years ago we're talking about, and at that time there were 6 people working on Time Out, which is a NIM, a newspaper inserted magazine that came out on a Thursday with a smaller edition on a Saturday, that basically was a clearinghouse for any writing on music, television, film, pop culture more broadly. It had features, it had reviews, it had news, and it was like everyone in music. When I was, as long as I was in the industry and subsequently read Time Out, and it was, you didn't always agree with what either the prominence of things or how many stars a review got, but you were there because it felt like it was unimaginable that it couldn't exist if you were in the business in Auckland at the time, because you need something that is a kind of a fulcrum around which everything else pivots. So as he describes in this, there's this relationship between Time Out and radio stations and blogs and now basically since then, and Chris attributes it to COVID, and I think COVID might well have been the thing that sort of broke music journalism in this country, when we had no music and we had these very uncertain times. In the same way that Radio Sport was shut down by NZME, it was very easy to kind of break these teams up, and they were doing that for rational business reasons. But what it means is it feels like there's a bit of a hole where that pipe of new artists and established artists that have got a new story to tell, whether it's about a record or something else. Well, where does that happen? And I'm so conscious, and we talk about this on the show, like how much of this is just two old war horses of the entertainment business kind of lamenting that the world has changed. We actually bring Samuel, our producer, and who's a freshly minted 23-year-old to discuss and challenge that perspective. And there is definitely something in that. But there is I've been talking to people in music in New Zealand for a while now. There's a piece I want to write in the coming weeks that basically about that sort of sense of where discovery and chronicling and the sort of criticism and all those things that used to be provided by a myriad publications where that happens now. And as Chris points out, there are a number of sites, blogs, platforms that do perform that, but and they're all uniformly excellent. But in the big shows, whether that's television or print, the big mainstream media platforms, which do have aging audiences, it's not there the way it was. And it might just be that this is just evolution, and we have to accept that reviews no longer have the same importance that they once did in the streaming era, and people never did need maybe a sort of 1,500 word profile of an emerging artist. It was that role has been taken by artists' own direct relationships through social media. I'm very open to that argument, but I'm not certain that we haven't lost something real along the way. And more to the point, we are continuing to do a lot of the other stuff we used to do. The big thing that's missing or that is gone is that. So look, this is not a conversation for everyone, but if you're a fan of or someone who has grown up reading or even creating pop cultural writing or feels that absence, then this conversation might well be for you. So this is Chris Schulz of Consumer, but also of his excellent Substack Boiler Room on the Fold. Kia ora, Chris. Welcome to the Fold.
Kia ora, Duncan.
It's great to see you again. I wonder if we could start by just going back to the start of your career and how you got into entertainment writing in the first place.
Yeah, that's going back right to the start. I grew up in Wanganui. We had no music, no concerts, nothing. I think there was a Jimmy Barnes concert at the Cook's Gardens one time that I didn't go to in my 17 years there. So my introduction to music was diving under the duvet late at night when I was supposed to be asleep and listening to the Top 9 at 9 from 2XSFM in Palmerston North and listening to Soundgarden and Pearl Jam and Nirvana and then buying the music magazines that were available.
What were they?
RTR Countdown magazine and Rip It Up. And I'd memorize them. I'd follow my favorite writers. I would read them over and over again, and I would dream of the day that I could go to the concerts, go to the festivals that they were talking about. Because, it was the one thing I would do to take me out of growing up in Wanganui.
So you always felt like a sort of an alien, that kind of classic trope of someone who didn't necessarily feel like they fit in, and music felt like it was the thing that spoke to you and kind of you could find your identity in.
100%. It was an introduction to another world that I had no part of. I couldn't get access to until I was 16, and me and two mates saved up our money, bought Pearl Jam tickets, went up to Auckland on the overnight train and went to Pearl Jam, and that was when I was like, fuck, I need to go to this every day for the rest of my life. And that was it, really, yeah. So, there were a few years of fucking around at university, not knowing what I was going to do, and then Mum one day suggested, I think we'd watched the Superman movie together, and I was like, I don't know what I'm going to do, Mum. And she's like, journalist. Because Superman's a journalist, right? Clark Kent. And I was like, that makes sense. Then I could write about music. And so I enrolled in 4 different journalism courses, got rejected from Auckland, rejected from Wellington.
It used to be so competitive. That's the thing that sort of, I feel like now we're as an industry just sort of ravenous for anyone who will even kind of glance at us. Back then it was like a mission just to get into a course, let alone get a job at the back of it. The course in
Auckland had actual journalists going to it. It was like TVNZ reporters who'd already been doing journalism, then going to university. They were locking us out of it. So I managed to get into the New Plymouth one with Jim Tucker and moved down to New Plymouth for 9 months and studied there. And then I got my first job at the North Shore Times Advertiser and just went, I've got to do something about this. So I emailed Rip It Up magazine. Scott Cara was the editor at the time.
Lovely guy.
They were in a D72 building on Dominion Road. And I would go up there once a month. He'd give me a stack of CDs, and that was the highlight of my month.
We had basically identical upbringings. Mine was the same with John Russell at Real Grove at the exact same time. And I assume that these are unpaid reviews, right?
Totally.
You were paid in CDs, which you might be able to trade for $5 at Real Groovy, and it still felt you had made it.
I put more effort into those reviews than anything I've ever done in my life. I agonized over every word, just desperate for, Scott to acknowledge them and publish them, and then also just to be involved in the scene, and it sort of just grew from there. But that was the thing back then, right? You could choose not just to be a music journalist, but you could choose which kind of music you wanted to cover.
Yeah.
If you wanted to cover rock and pop, it was Rip It Up. If you wanted to cover alt and hip hop, it was Real Groove. If you wanted to cover dance and electronica, you had Pavement and Remix
and pulp, and it was such a and that's kind of what I want to get into, because you've been writing in Boiler Room lately about. And this sort of absence of there is no kind of central place where it feels like music is litigated. So certainly for people who came up in the era and the system that we did. And before we get into that, I want to kind of describe the ecosystem as we both basically found it on arrival. So you just described the sheer number of music magazines, and that's where music was the main or only thing they talked about, without even getting into the sort of pavements and these things that had music as part of their repertoire. It was just, there was so much coverage that was there. What do you, in terms of the relationship between the media and the media that it sort of scrutinized or interacted with, how did that work? Because there's one thing to be writing reviews of CDs, it's another to be, to get that step closer to the artist that you're describing.
Yeah. Well, for me, it was 9/11. I was at the North Shore Times Advertiser. We weren't allowed to watch it. They made us turn the TVs off. It was deadline day. And so we all sat on the stuff.co.nz website watching that unfold. And I remember sitting there going, I need to be online. That's where the most immediate stuff is happening. So I managed to get a job. I went down and interviewed, got a job there. It was a lovely editor, this hardcore American woman called Christine Garcia. She was running it. It was tucked into the corner of the Dominion Post building. No one gave a shit about it.
So you very deliberately, you felt the heat of the internet and were like, I've got to get closer to that.
100%.
That's the thing that's coming. That's interesting.
Yeah. And so there were 7 or 8 people working on stuff at that point, tucked into the corner of this earthquake-prone building on Bulcott Street next to the sports department. And I remember the first week, they trained me up on a CMS and they went, oh, look, nothing's been put into the entertainment section for 2 weeks. Let's update that. And I was like, wait, what? I could just sit here and fill the entertainment section and let's see how those stats go.
And there's no one watching you. If you're doing it live.
We just trialed everything. We got a video camera and went down to the King Kong premiere and interviewed. Suddenly there's me, 2.5 years out of journalism school, interviewing Peter Jackson with a microphone on the red carpet, next to all of the TV crews. It was crazy. And then I remember pitching we should do live concert coverage. What if I went to the big day out and just provided updates back to the newsroom? We did a rolling blog. And so I came up, I couldn't believe it. I'm walking around the big day out with a BlackBerry at a music festival, being paid to be there.
So that the teenager from Wanganui is
just
is
grinning
ecstatic
from ear to ear.
And did you have sort of analytics? We could do a whole podcast on them, but how conscious were you of the success or failure of your coverage?
Well, yeah, online right from the start, that was huge. We'd be looking at what was working and doing more of that. And the Big Day Out blog, I remember the first one, more people read that than were actually at the festival. And
Wow.
that's when I remember the editor going, okay, we need to We need to go in that direction. We need to do more of this. You know, everyone who couldn't go to the big day out was reading it. And then people afterwards were going back and reading how the day unfolded.
And that's what's interesting though, right? So what you're talking about is the early stage of journalism online in New Zealand and music being incredibly popular to the point where it naturally should, according to the immutable logic of analytics, get more resource. And here we sit now knowing that, you know, and this is what you've been writing about, that the number of specialist kind of single issue music journalists in New Zealand is, I mean, it's less than 10. It's probably less than 5, right? Like it's really...
I don't think we have any full-time music journalists at any major news publications anymore.
Well, RNZ accepted, right?
RNZ, but I'm talking about sort of print.
Yeah, so print, if you think about print publications, which is where, you know, where there would have been dozens historically, like the time that you're talking about. And I guess... like what I want to dig into is two things. Like one, sort of how it happened, and then two, what has been lost. You know,
the how is easy.
Yeah,
I think.
Yeah. Well, so let's talk about the how, because there is a contradiction in what you're saying in some respects, in that. If it's so popular, why is there not, you know, because there are less journalists overall, but they haven't gone to sort of zero the way that music has.
It's COVID. It's 100% COVID. It's, you know, if you look, and this is the best example for me, we haven't talked about Time Out magazine at the Herald yet. That was a weekly insert on Thursdays and then like a mini version in the Saturday paper.
That was a big part of your career, was as a major contributor to that.
I think that the peak of it, right? Like I was at Stuff on my own the whole time. No one sort of, you know, I was campaigning to get more reporters all the time, and I'd pitch it all the time, and they were like, no, you're doing good. We don't want to do that. And so Time Out was like, okay, there's people over there. There's a team of people putting thought into it, having discussions every week about what we should and shouldn't cover, and I desperately wanted that.
Describe the scale of that team and what you put out.
See, this is where I get emotional, because
you did say that this would happen. Yeah,
there were 6 of us just every week deciding what was awesome, and we all had our own patches. And so, you know, you'd have these amazing debates, like, you know, someone would pitch one artist or act or TV show or movie, and someone else would pitch something. It's like, what are we putting on the cover? What are we reviewing? It was this constant search for the biggest, hottest, newest, most exciting thing, and it happened like every day. And I got to be a part of that. I got to help mentor some of the younger staff coming through too, and that felt really healthy and how it should be when you start getting to the age I am.
Why do you think it's COVID? Because I'm curious, because I have like a bunch of, to me it's a lot of different things. Like in some way, like the... You know, to me, if I was trying to advance a theory of it, would be a complicated one that involved, like, I think food has replaced music as the sort of center of the sort of obsessive cultural life of a whole group of people who used to naturally be like on music, and food was like a thing that you put in so that you go listen to more music. And now I think it's sort of inverted. So there's that element of the culture. I think that the sheer proliferation, there's an overwhelm associated with when you move from a constant emphasis on new music, which is what you had in the CD era, to a here's all music all the time, there's some being put somewhere in the pipe, but you're not necessarily exposed to it. There's like a distribution side, a supply side problem and a distribution side problem. Like, and all of these things have conspired to make, to me, paradoxically, the role of the critic or the editor or the person sorting that is more important than ever, but there isn't we don't have that ability to kind of connect with new artists and have them explain to us the way that they used to be done, that the sort of channels aren't there, and that stuff has all conspired to kind of make music feel, while it's very much in the culture, it's that sense of new music is just not as salient as it was when we were growing up.
I have this conversation with people all the time. People our age still want to know what's happening, what's big, what's rising to the top, and I think I think that's where a place like Time Out is sorely missed, because you have these stepping stones for artists, right? They go from the sort of, the under the radars, the sniffers, the ambient lights, the 13th floors, and they sort of build that buzz slowly. They do more gigs, they get bigger audiences, and then someone at a place like Time Out notices that and goes, hey, look, there's this swelling of support for this artist, let's put them in Time Out. And then like 6 months, a year later, the album's coming out and you go, well, are they worthy of a cover? So they build that stepping stones, and then, and this I think is an important bit, competition sees that and goes, okay, they're covering it, this must be worth covering in the Dominion Post, in Sunday Magazine, in Viva. There's other editors who see that. Also, like TV shows and radio shows would also pick up Time Out and go, okay, we should have them on our show. Look, they've got a Time Out cover. They're important.
But basically what you're describing is a whole ecosystem which used to be where the action was, which used to be the sort of the only really distribution kind of clearinghouse for culture, and which is now, that's now moved definitively to social and streaming. And like I feel this absence too, right? Even as we're sitting in the podcast studio of the Spinoff, a new media publication that doesn't have a full-time music writer, sometimes publishes on music, but certainly not in the kind of ongoing systematic way that Time Out represented for the Herald. But do you, is it just that we're sort of old men shaking our fists at clouds, that this stuff is happening, but it's happening through particular accounts on TikTok, Instagram,
totally,
and playlists? Like, is that what's happened?
Totally. Yep. You can go find a lot of probably what you want to find on there. Artists are sharing their own stories now that way. I talked to Rodney Fisher from Good Shirt about that, and that's how he promoted his latest album, because he couldn't get interviews out there. I think, I've wrestled with this, and I think that when a newspaper or a website or a magazine stops covering artists, New Zealand artists I'm talking about, that, they're saying this isn't as important as the other things we're covering. If you don't see, so take Ernie Bell, for example, she's incredible. She's releasing a debut album next week. If you don't see her on the pages of the Herald or of Stuff next to All Blacks, politicians, business, whatever, then you're saying it's not as important. And I think that's the big loss there. It's almost like a statement, right? Like this just doesn't matter.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I think that's the thing that's really kind of confounding. I was talking to a musician recently about this, someone who he's probably 10, 15 years younger than us, but came up as a teenager probably reading our writing, to be honest. I was reading those kind of publications and was a fan of New Zealand music, almost as if it was a genre. And that was a lot of us, right? Like we had the music we were into, but there was something about the music that came from this place. And then the thing that happened, so with all of those platforms I mentioned before, the Spotify, YouTube, TikTok, etc., their geography is far less relevant as a sorting mechanism than the newspapers just all have a natural geography to them. So, while, our politics, all the rest of it, that is still mainly cleared through these kind of traditional mediums that are geographically bound. As soon as they shift to there, New Zealand artists are just playing the same global soup as everyone else. They might find success in a very distributed way, but there isn't that kind of, without that place where it can all sort of happen and they can be almost anointed the way that they were, and there were issues with that system, don't get me wrong, then it's like they didn't, like, I'm trying to think of like what is an Ernie Bell is a classic example of a fascinating new artist who doesn't have the same name recognition that, say, an Aldous Harding, who just was quite a similar area, but just happened to come up 6 or 7 years earlier.
So why doesn't she have the same recognition? Is that because she's not getting the coverage that someone like Aldous Harding had 7 or 8 years ago when that infrastructure was in place? Or, I don't know. It's a tough question. You're right. There are artists who are making this work and they probably don't care that they're not getting interviews. There are artists who are hitting those streaming services And they're buying houses because of it. I know that because I've talked to them. I interviewed a couple of rappers for the spin-off a while back. Sempra was one of them, and they're just loving life because they're hitting those streaming numbers. So yeah, you're right. There are other avenues. Artists can make it without talking to journalists and having stories written about them. For me, it comes back to like, I almost like had a sense of, like documenting history. You can have all the TikToks and Instagram reels in the world, but you can't go and search for them 10, 15 years later. That no one's compiling those into a thing.
They're not going to become a Wikipedia entry.
No.
I mean, all of this we're talking about is the sort of Web 2.0 era, and we're moving beyond that, and it can feel at times, we've got Samuel here recording it and recording us 23 on Monday. Happy birthday, Samuel. And like, I'm sort of just imagining how this must sound, to a couple of guys near twice his age.
Can we ask him?
Yeah. Would you come on and just say, like, does this stuff matter to you?
Yeah, I think there's not that appetite for journalism. And I do agree with what you're saying is you need that documented. I think that's the kind of the role of journalism in this whole thing is you need 10 years down the track something tangible. But I do think I get my promotion directly from the source now, like if an artist I like has a new song coming out, their promotion for it's going to show up on my TikTok feed before any journalist even gets to speak to them. That's going to be the first place they go is publishing their own work.
That's kind of the crux of it, right? Like, who's this for? Is it for us and people who remember and enjoyed that old world, or are the artists missing it too? Because that's almost more relevant.
You'd have to ask the artist. I have been doing that, and I have future stories coming up about that. I want to talk to younger artists about sort of how many interviews they've done and whether they consider that as an important part of their growth and their career. Do people want this? I mean, I would just point to my tiny little newsletter over the past 10 days, and it's grown so much. I've had so many people reach out and say thank you, and why aren't more people doing this? And the vibe around it is please keep doing this. I've got people paying me, and I work full time. I've got 2 kids. This is just something I'm doing in my spare time.
Can we just let's just do a little plug, because I think Boiler Room is such a fantastic product, and I also think that the urgency and the openness and the reflection that has been in your coverage of this, I mean, that's why I reached out, and I think it's important because what you are describing, as much as this is just 2 old war horses kind of reminiscing about the old days, it is something that I've heard a lot about from other people in the music business, some older, some younger, like a keening sense of an absence. Do you want to just describe this little series that you've run, where it came from and the response to it?
Yeah, sure. I went to the Skrillex show. Way too old to be at the Skrillex show. Loved the shit out of it. It was incredible. Monday morning, as you do before you start work, you have a coffee and you scroll through some headlines, and I wanted to read some opinions on the Skrillex show. Couldn't find any. The next weekend, Eden Festival was held in the same place. Wanted to go, couldn't, but wanted to know what it was like. That's a brand new music festival. With Lauryn Hill and 660, huge headliners. Couldn't find any coverage about it. And my brain kind of snapped at that point. I don't think I'd read too much coverage about the lack of music criticism, but yeah, that's when I blatted out a post in about 30 minutes and just sent it out, and it sort of took off. And so that's sort of become an ongoing theme. I found it really emotional to write those pieces because of my history, and because this is an industry that gave me so much and got me out of Wanganui, stopped me from being a supermarket checkout operator or something. And I want kids who maybe can't afford to play an instrument or go to the lessons, but shouldn't that be an option if they want to cover this stuff? I don't know. Maybe that's just my history and my thinking about it. But yeah, I can't cover it too much in my newsletter because it gets too depressing for me. So I have to mix it up. I've deliberately started doing much more positive posts just to make it a little more uplifting. But inevitably, everyone I talk to, the conversation comes back around to, where are the journalists? Where is the coverage? And if I can contribute just a little bit to that, then, maybe I'll give it a shot, and maybe that will grow into something where I can start nurturing some new talent coming through. That would be incredible.
The Fold is brought to you by O Media, making brands unmissable and public spaces better across Aotearoa, with over 4,000 out-of-home advertising sites nationwide across both street furniture and retail centres. I'm super grateful to O Media for enabling us to make unmissable connections with Kiwis.
Ready to rediscover the joys of cycling? With over 300 kilometres of cycle paths across Tāmaki Makaurau, jumping on your bike and going for a ride is such a fun way to discover the city from a different perspective. Cycling is getting more and more popular across Auckland, so now's a great time to join the hype and give cycling a go. Head to at.govt/cycling to find your nearest cycleway today.
Like many things in journalism, it's a financial problem. If you had unlimited resources, like say in RNZ, not that they have unlimited resources, but they have like a fixed pot of money and they can divide it according to what they consider to be the most important thing without worrying about whether the thing pays its own way. Like that's a very different mentality for a news organisation to have. But yeah, we have, for example, we did have a full-time music editor, Henry Oliver, who now edits Metro. That was funded by Spark. That was a passion project for me, selling that thing, and it took a long time to try and find the right place. And I was thrilled to do it. The reality is, it probably didn't perform as well as we might have anticipated. Like I think we did exactly what we said we would do, but you're writing about New Zealand music. Like that's what it has to be. That's the differentiator for the spin-off. We don't write really, we review and comment on a few things internationally, but the vast majority of our scope is local. The Time Out, that wasn't true. Like there was a lot of New Zealand stuff, but there was a lot of international stuff too. So that maybe was part of it. It was over limited, but there is this issue where, like, maybe when you're writing about New Zealand stuff, if you're doing it as an island, if you don't have that sort of feeder system of a C4 and radio, and if young people are more likely to give their attention to UGC platforms, we actually published a piece. Charlotte wrote a fantastic feature on Ernie Bell very early in her career. I don't know what the numbers were, but I would guess that they were good but not great, because it was a bit of an island at the time. And I think that's the issue, is that the thing kind of, the tide comes in and just washes away. And even if you sort of stand up and say, Boiler Room can do fantastic stuff, even if we were to be given a full-time music reporter, it would just be hard to necessarily.
I get what you're saying.
This is the thing I struggle with. Is can it be recreated?
It comes back to, is there a good story there, to me, right? Is there a story worth telling there? And that's what any journalist should be looking at something and asking. I look at that all the time. I spent 20 years trying to prove to editors that local music and international music and any entertainment was worth covering in a way. If you do it cleverly and without doing it sensationally and without turning it into clickbait, there's a way of doing it that works alongside the rest of the coverage. Now, I went and looked at stuff in the New Zealand Herald's entertainment sections, and I don't want to call them out, but the Herald had 7 Matthew Perry stories out of 9 stories on its entertainment homepage.
That is analytics talking, right? So
you can have one Matthew Perry story, mix it up, put in some local concert news, put in an interview with an artist. Do you know what I mean? Like make it an offering that's readable for a lot of different people. Otherwise, you're just trying to hit the Google clicks.
Entertainment has now been subsumed into lifestyle in most big publications, and that those 6 reporters that you were talking about in those glory days of Time Out, that's probably one person who is just a general reporter just trying to hit numbers and putting a bunch of stories up. So, like, the thing that we're not talking about is the fact that you're maybe the best doing it in New Zealand, and you've got a full-time job at Consumer heading investigation. So, you know, like it's a skilled task. It's not something you can just go, hey, cub reporter, go along to Skrillex and have all of the context and the language and the descriptive ability to just be able to turn that thing out. So when it does happen, often you wince because it doesn't feel like it's been given the right...
You're right.
You know?
It takes time, and I can't help but think about all of the 660 stories I've written, right? And I remember the first time I interviewed them, they did not want to talk to me. They did not open up at all. It was really tough. And the second time I was like, right, I'm not doing that again. We're going to go and do something. What do they like doing? They like boxing. I'm going to go boxing with them. So I went boxing with them. That was a story. And then for the third story...
Was this the business story that you did? So I think that was one of the best pieces. That and your RAS story, I think, would be in any Hall of Fame of music writing in New Zealand. And that was so crucial to me, sort of unlocking. No, you're thinking about 660 wrong. This is a band that thinks about a business in a really extraordinary way. And you know, that's why you're very good, Chris. And it's a loss to this business that you're not doing it.
Yeah, and that's what I've struggled with Boiler Room, right? Like, I'm 45. I should be sitting back having other interests, because I do have other interests, and watching the new breed come through and telling me what's good and what's current. And if they're not getting the opportunities to spend time building those contacts, because let's face it, some of the people in the entertainment industry, they're not going to talk to you unless you've been around for 10, 15 years in some cases. Promoters are notoriously prickly. They will still talk to me. So I don't know. I don't know what the answer is there, Duncan. I did warn you before I came on that I didn't really have any answers, barring someone coming in and putting a whole lot of money and effort into something that could fix this. But hopefully by talking about it and pointing a few fingers and you know,
I mean, I was at
raising that awareness.
Yeah, like certainly like not talking about it or pretending that there's not something that's changed, then I don't think anything, you can't expect it to resolve that way. I went to this New Zealand On Air music event last night. They've got a big report which actually came out basically as we record this, that is an attempt for them. Like they clearly recognise that there's a new music discovery problem, and everyone's always trying to solve it. There's a new Spark Stuff, social first series that's been put out. You know, my understanding, like I'm not sure whether it is or it isn't. I'm not privy to how it's performing, but people are trying. Like it's a very serious effort to try and figure out how to solve this thing. And part of it is also like we are print journalists. We come from an era where we typed and then they printed it out. And for a lot of people, that has become a bit of an aberrant cultural, like they're much more likely to watch someone break down a new record on TikTok than they are to read a story about it. And we just have to accept that that's gone from being the default communication mode to a weird one. And that's maybe what this comes down to. We just have to be open to that idea, and that's kind of heartbreaking for us, but it's it's potentially real. Yeah, totally. And I fully accept that. I'm not really worried about that at all. I think it can, print and online can still be a big part of the mix, and they're tangible things that remain. You can go and read all my old Big Day Out reviews from 2004. They're still there. Yeah. I mean, it is weird that like we as a country fund audio culture, which is a fantastic side. It's, I think what do they call it? The noisy library of New Zealand music or something like that. It functions as a place which catalogues scenes and bands and labels historically, and that's reasonably well funded in the context of New Zealand. I'm sure that Simon Gregory or anyone who's or Chris Burke or whoever's running it now would go, fuck, it's hard, but that is probably by far the most substantial contribution funded by New Zealand On Air to cataloguing the history of New Zealand music, but where does the present fit into that? And I'm not sure. I think that's almost the missing piece. It almost feels like in about 2017, maybe it was 2020 with the pandemic, it sort of cleaved and the new became a little bit less anchored.
I left the Herald in 2019 and those 6 jobs at Time Out still existed. So somewhere between then and now, those most of those jobs have disappeared. I know Stuff's entertainment team has been pulled into the news team.
Yeah, it's all sort of general.
Yeah, so those journalists aren't getting a chance to work on those contacts, to build up the to go and work on their ideas and build up those contacts and get those stories out there. So you don't have the chance to create this kind of career over time. Yeah, that's the bit that gets to me, because that's where I'd love to step in and help nurture and mentor and be like, hey, I can help. I will help. Give me a call.
Yeah.
I will turn up. I'll help. I would love to see something done about this. If anyone wants to do something, give me a call and I'll do what I can.
I mean, if you're listening to this and don't subscribe to Boiler Room, and it's felt like a interesting discussion that's substantive to what, whatever your interest in music is, I can just only give the strongest possible recommendation to subscribe to it. It's a Substack that Chris pours all of this sort of passion and curiosity into. And I get the feeling you're just starting rather than done with this line of inquiry. So, yeah, look, thank you so much for coming on The Fold. Like, I'm going to continue to kind of look at this and potentially write about it as well, and maybe have a few more guests up on it. But there is a sense that there's something missing in music. Like you, I feel like it's print, but I'm very open to the idea that it might not be. We should also acknowledge that the people, you referred to them like sniffers and so on. Like, some people are saying we're out here doing it, like, give us our due. Maybe shout those out again, just the people, places where you can see this stuff.
Yeah, under the radar is great for news headlines and concert announcements and all that kind of stuff. Ambient Light's doing tons of concert reviews all around the country. Sniffers does a lot of hip hop and dance. I find a lot of new artists through them. And then Graham Reed with Elsewhere. And the 13th Floor as well. So that's 5.
Yeah.
Just off the top of my head.
And it's interesting, right, that they are perhaps more passion-driven, though there are commercial elements to all of them. Where it's missing is in the sort of mainstream publication. So if you are curious beyond Boiler Room, it's actually just a bit more legwork. And they all have vibrant communities around them as well. Hey, thanks so much for coming up, Chris. I'm such a fan of your work and your writing, and I'm really glad that even as you go into this investigative mode, which I know you're not quite able to talk about just yet, that you've still got the time and the passion to put together Boiler Room.
Thanks, Duncan. I hope to return when we celebrate the return of music journalism in Aotearoa.
Oh, it'll be a great day. That was The Fold, brought to you by our partners at oOh!media, making brands unmissable and public spaces better across Aotearoa. Huge thanks to oOh!media for sponsoring this episode of The Fold and enabling us to make unmissable connections with Kiwis.
Talofa Lover. I'm Madeline Chapman, editor at The Spinoff. If you have the means, consider supporting our high-quality journalism by becoming a Spinoff member. Sign up now at thespinoff.co.nz/donate.
The Spinoff Podcast Network.